Hello and welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning for the second session in our current Leaner and Greener webinar series. I'm Patricia Kingston, I'm the Corporate Events Officer at Tourism NI, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all along today. Hopefully you made it along last week when we heard from Joseph on all things climate change, but if you did miss it, that session is now available to watch again at tourismni.com/leaner greener, so do be sure to check it out when you get a chance. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Kieran Coig from Very Connect, who's going to be continuing the series by exploring biodiversity in Northern Ireland and revealing some of the current threats and what we may be able to do about these. We've lots to cover over the next hour, so get yourself comfortable as Kieran takes us on a journey through invasive species via all things water, from waterways to water quality and water conservation, and also provides some insights on sustainable urban drainage systems, which I believe are known as SUDs. You can keep me right, Kieran. Following the main presentation, we'll be having a short Q&A session with Kieran. So if you do think of any questions at all during the presentation today, be sure to pop them in the chat box in your control panel at any time during the session, and we'll pick up as many of these as possible at the end. So lots and lots to cover once again today. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Kieran Coig. Good morning, Kieran. Pleasure to meet you, and over to you.
Thanks, Patricia. Appreciate that, and thank you all for joining us here this morning. Really happy to be here. Delighted to be delivering this session and to meet you all. And look, lots of really interesting topics to cover here, as Patricia was just saying. For example, we'll be looking at things like invasive species. So we'll be looking at lots to cover, as I say. We look at things like invasive species. On your premises, we look at other things like water quality and how it affects tourism, how climate change is affecting water as well, and things to kind of look out for in this area, as well as water conservation for tourism businesses. So what you can do to help what can you do to help conserve water and help with many of the issues that we will cover throughout this session. And to finish it out, we look at a very interesting concept called SUDs, or sustainable drainage systems. So to say, look, lots of really interesting stuff to cover in this session today. So look, without further ado, get comfortable and we'll get going with this session. I suppose the best place to start with this, at the title of this session, is Threats to Biodiversity in Northern Ireland. Probably a good place to start is look at what exactly is biodiversity and why is it important. So if you kind of break down the word biodiversity, so bios, or bio meaning life, and diversity, the variety. And so the variety of life, really. And what biodiversity, if you think it makes up this beautiful island that we live on, you think of the woodlands, grasslands, or rivers, and nature, the birds singing in the trees, all of this makes up biodiversity. And if all of these things come together to form an interconnected kind of web of life, and I suppose it provides many benefits to society. So it's not just nature for nature's sake. It also provides many benefits to society. Now, oftentimes we don't really think about it this way, but there are often many benefits we get that kind of you mightn't think about it at first. And we call these ecosystem services, and they're kind of that's the umbrella term above all of them, but it can be divided down into kind of 4 or different kind of groupings. And first one we'd look at would be provisioning, and you can see this all in the kind of the diagram on the left of the slide here. Provisioning, and these are again benefits that are extracted from nature. So if you think about things like food, where we get our food, or things like timber, oil, another one, or even medicine from plants, all of these things are provided by nature, so they're provisioning services. And another one would be regulating services. So that would be, again, processes essential for a healthy ecosystem and society. So you're thinking about things like, for example, pollination, and that is a service provided by nature. But if you think about it, it's such a huge service that we often going to take for granted, like how if God forbid something was to ever happen, how could we replace a service like that? Such a massive service that's provided by nature, by our pollinators. You could also look at plants. Plants filter air and they produce oxygen. Again, we wouldn't be lasting very long if something was to happen there. So these are things we often take for granted, but it's service provided by nature. Another service that you could look at would be something like cultural services. So again, not materials benefits, that we gain from nature. But things like, for example, if you look at mental health, you know, I don't know about any of you, but if you've ever gone for a walk in the middle of the woods, you never coming back feeling worse than you went in at the start. You know, it boosts the mental health, it helps to ground you. So that could be an example of a cultural service. And you could also look at things like, you know, a lot of art is inspired by nature or things like that. So we get inspiration. These would be kind of cultural services that we get from nature, or from biodiversity. And then the final one I just kind of point out there would be supporting services. So if you look at these, are kind of, again, ecosystems could not be sustained without the consistency of these underlying processes. For example, things like photosynthesis. You know, if plants weren't able to carry out photosynthesis, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Other examples would be things like the water cycle, which we'll get into now in a little bit, so I won't say too much, but this big process happening in the background all the time that we often take for granted, but if something was to go wrong, could run into a lot of trouble. And these are kind of things that we get, or benefits we get from biodiversity. And so as one thing worth saying with biodiversity too, the more variety is better. The more biodiversity you have, the more resilient you are. Because as I say, look, the more variety you have, you're well adjusted to any. If changes happen, you're more resilient to those changes. Like, for example, if you had just one species of tree, if something was to go wrong, you know, say there was an illness, or a fungus started to attack those trees, or you know, changes in climate was affecting that tree. If that was the only species you had, you'd be really in a lot of pressure. You'd be in a lot of trouble. Whereas by having a wide variety of different species of tree, it just means you're more resilient to change. And so the key thing with biodiversity, the more variety you have, the better. And I suppose just to kind of tie in as well, so biodiversity or nature, just with tourism, kind of in a visitor attitude survey back in 2006. 80% of visitors to Ireland rated the scenery as the primary reason for visiting Ireland, and about 74% of them said that they were attracted by the natural, unspoilt environment that they saw here. So that's what actually drove us back in that survey back in 2006. That was a big driver of why people were coming. So you can see why looking after the biodiversity and nature we have is really, really important, especially as well for kind of the tourism industry. So look, I suppose just before I kind of go any further, if you want to throw in the chat function, just kind of to share among yourselves, like, you know, have any of you noticed, or have you noticed any changes to the nature in your local area just over your own lifetime? What kind of changes have you noticed? You know, some of you here might be a bit older, so you might have seen changes a bit more, but just show in the chat there if you can, just to kind of just introduce yourself, but also just to share what changes have you noticed yourself over time. So look, just to look at the state of nature in Northern Ireland. So what's it look like? And this kind of information here is coming from a report called The State of Nature, which was released back in 2019. And some of the things that came out in that report, they were saying that there was about 75% of the landmass in Northern Ireland is actually, the primary land use is actually agriculture. So 75% going to agriculture. Also found in the area, or in Northern Ireland, you've got internationally significant areas of blanket bogs. There's also large inland and coastal water bodies, including, for example, Lough Neagh, which has, I believe there's about 40,000 breeding birds visit Lough Neagh every year. So massive, again, a massive kind of home or place for a lot of wildlife in that area. There's also 650 kilometers of coastline, which kind of more than half of Northern Ireland's biodiversity is found beneath the sea. So again, the coastline is a huge part of the biodiversity in Northern Ireland too. And also kind of just worth mentioning, Northern Ireland holds a number of species that are found nowhere else in the UK. For example, you have species like the Irish hare, and the Irish damselfly, Irish whitebeam, cryptic wood white butterfly, and pollen. And you can see them in the pictures there on the right hand side. So they're found nowhere else in the UK other than Northern Ireland. So kind of you have these significant species are rare when you look at kind of the UK wide context. So that's kind of a kind of a bit of an overview of Northern Ireland. If we look at the kind of the current state of what's going on in Northern Ireland, from that same report, they highlighted, there was a few kind of key highlights that are points that can be taken from it. First was that in Northern Ireland was ranked 12th worst in the world for biodiversity loss, which again, that's a fairly significant statistic. And this was measured again, looking at, I think, looking at over 200 different countries. They were looking at, so comparing from, say, a pristine state, so an area in pristine state, and then how much biodiversity loss it has seen. And that's how it was being measured. And so you can see about 50% of biodiversity has been actually lost from Northern Ireland from that. So again, obviously, and actually a really big concern. And kind of as part of that, you have things like, for example, there you can see curlew populations have decreased about 80% since the 80s. And you've got about 11% of wildlife is threatened with extinction. About butterflies have decreased about 43%. And across the UK, about 41% of species have decreased in the last 10 years. Again, you can imagine this is a really big concern. A lot of people are very, very concerned about this, particularly if this trend keeps going the way it is. And it is a big, big problem. And again, a lot of pressure is kind of driving this. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide there, things like land use, so the way we changes in how we use or manage our land. So that could be things like agriculture, but also urbanization, woodland management, freshwater management. But there are other things too, like invasive species, which we'll get into in a few minutes, or climate change. So as our climate shifts, some of our biodiversity not doing so good as it would in the past. So a lot of pressures coming in, causing these challenges in Northern Ireland, or to kind of the biodiversity of Northern Ireland. But look, I suppose it is a concern unless we can turn things around. But there are there's a lot of good initiatives happening now, trying to kind of turn the tides on this and make changes. A lot of good initiatives happening up in Northern Ireland. To help with this, just to kind of to give one or two examples, some of you might be aware of this, but one of 3 conifer species found in Ireland is juniper, and over the recent decades, it has been on the decline, mainly due to land practices. Now, in Northern Ireland, there is the mourn juniper, which is actually a genetically distinct species, and also has been on the decline. But back in 2015, 2016, the Mourne Heritage Trust actually started a kind of a project in the Silent Valley. So they set up propagation units to help, again, protect this plant. And they actually have a dedicated team of volunteers working on that project. So really good work happening there. And again, a dedicated team working on this, trying to protect protect this species from its decline. Other things kind of worth we're talking about here. You've got issues like marine litter, as I was saying, like pollution, another a big threat to biodiversity. And marine litter, naturally having such a large area coastline in Northern Ireland, marine litter is a big part of that. So keep Northern Ireland beautiful. They have released some statistics saying that about 36 million a year is lost to beach amenity value from marine litter being deposited. And they estimated about 625 pieces of litter were being found on average per 100 metre of beach in Northern Ireland. Looking, it's littered with it. And about 80% of that was actually made up primarily of plastic. 80% of that litter is being made up of plastic. So litter being a really big issue. There are a lot of great initiatives. For example, They Live Here and Love Here. I think that's tied in with Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. They organise beach cleans, and they actually do corporate volunteering events too, where you can actually, your company can volunteer to do clean a section of beach. Again, great initiative. Great to have your business seen to be doing something to help combat these problems. But they organise these. They organise them from time to time throughout the year, but also you can organise it with them as well. Another Ulster Wildlife, I believe, also do other corporate volunteering initiatives too. Again, looking at things like clearing, say, invasives, or helping like litter picks like that. So there's a lot of good things happening, initiatives where people are trying to help support biodiversity in Northern Ireland. And I suppose just one other one like to highlight is the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. Again, this is an island-wide attempt to try to reverse declines in pollinating insects. Again, a really, really big initiative happening all across the island of Ireland. And you can see on that little map on the left, these are all the kind of individuals who have registered their actions that they're making. So at the moment, they're looking for participants to register their areas and actions they're trying to make to help support biodiversity. So, sorry, to help support pollinators. So you can see that loads of different cohorts from gardeners, farmers, councils, schools, but also businesses as well. So they're looking for businesses to just to register where they are and what actions they're taking. So that might be something as simple as planting a few native plants, pollinator friendly plants, or it could be trying to reduce your dependency on pesticides. Again, another huge one that a lot of groups have been doing to help support pollinators. I suppose it's a great initiative if you can get involved. You'll see even within a year or so of starting to take actions, you'll actually see the changes. And many people I've worked with have been involved, and it's great. It's a good, a feel good kind of project too. You can see the changes happening, and it's small little changes that make a huge difference. So that's kind of another one. And you can see in the Northern Ireland, lots and lots of groups have got on board and it's kind of are doing their bit to try help support pollinators as part of this All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So look, the next subject that we'll just talk about for a while will be looking at invasive alien species. Some of you might know about this, some of you might not know too much. So the best place to start is look, what are IAS, or invasive alien species? And what these are, organisms, so that could be anything from plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. These, so that they're not native to a particular area and are usually environmentally and economically harmful to that area. So that's kind of a quick definition of what they are. So they're not native to the area, but they have environmental and economic harmful to that area. And look, it's worth as a kind of make a point. Species migrate all the time. Many birds migrate to Ireland every year, and species naturally migrate. But invasive alien species, these how these are classified is that they've been introduced by humans since the last ice age. So naturally, they would not have made it to Ireland. It was through human activities how they arrived on this island. That's kind of how you did the distinction between them. And look, so before I go to talking about why invasive species are a challenge, it's worth saying, but why is native biodiversity so positive, or why is it important? So look, native biodiversity evolves over thousands of years, and it all forms part of this kind of a natural balance. It's all intricately interbalanced. They're all connected together in this fine balance in ecosystems, and it's that kind of that connectedness that holds together the ecosystem, or kind of the ecosystems together, holds this whole thing together. And so where they're all working together kind of in unison. When invasive species become a problem is they disturb that natural balance. So what makes them successful? So how do they spread? So how do they cause problems? So they're very, very successful because they're very quick at growing. They can often reproduce very, very quickly, and they can disperse or spread really, really well. And they're often very tolerant to a wide range of environmental conditions too. So can sometimes give them an edge over native species, which are kind of more suited to where they are. And they also, as I say, disrupt the natural balance of things. So again, native wildlife haven't quite, they've never come across anything like this whatever the introduced species is. And this kind of gives the invasive species an edge. The natives haven't quite figured out a kind of a protection mechanism against them, and so that's where they can cause trouble or cause problems. Not all introduced species are invasive, is worth mentioning. Look, there are many species that have been introduced that are not native to Ireland, but do benefit us. For example, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, the humble spud. There's nobody out there petitioning to ban potatoes, but they actually originally came from South America. So not native, but again, not an invasive species. They don't cause issues. Only about 10 to 15% of introduced species actually become invasive. And that's around, like, I suppose, in Northern Ireland, about 1,280 non-native species have actually been recorded. So that's kind of just worth saying. Not all of them are invasive. So I suppose if I was to look at what problems they cause, so Bellard and Blackburn back in 2016, just a quote from that paper, worldwide invasive alien species are the second biggest driver of species extinction overall. That's a fairly serious quote. If you think of a second biggest threat to biodiversity or driver of extinction overall. And how do you do this? And they'll outcompete native wildlife. Some plants will kind of blanket out light so other plants can't grow, and so they'll reduce biodiversity and they alter habitats to suit themselves, so affecting other wildlife and habitat. A lot of them too, because they'll outcompete the native wildlife, but then as throughout their life cycle they can die back at certain times of year, leaving riverbanks completely bare, which can increase kind of possibility of erosion of riverbanks. I'll give an example of that in a minute. But they can also kind of block amenities, and some of them can actually be very dangerous to human health as well. Plants like as a giant hogweed, which if you get its sap on your skin, it can actually make you kind of reactive to sunlight, so you burst out in rashes. It can actually be very dangerous to your health, as well as other species can actually damage infrastructure, so they can break through walls or through footpaths, things like that, so it can damage infrastructure. That's a lot of the threats that they cause. Just to kind of give a quote, as I said, it can cause kind of damage to infrastructure, but there was a recent estimate suggested that invasive alien species now cost Northern Ireland approximately 46.5 million each year in damages and control. That's a serious amount of money if you think about it. A lot of that's taxpayers' money, but some of it is private as well. People putting in their own money to try, treat and manage these invasive species. So it is not just a problem for biodiversity, but also economically it has a lot of consequences. If I was to just give a couple of quick examples, or one or two examples, I'm sure many of you here are familiar or might have heard of this species. Hopefully you haven't seen it too close to where you work or on your premises. But this plant here is called Japanese knotweed. And as the name suggests, it's not from around these parts. Originally coming from Asia, Japan, that part of the world, and believed to have arrived in Ireland in kind of the late 1800s. And it's one of the kind of the serious ones in this country. I'm sure many of you probably have heard of it. Causes a lot of damage. Spreads really, it spreads like mad. Will outcompete native wildlife for light. And as I said, in winter time, when it dies back, it leaves riverbanks where it often grows completely bare. And this is when rivers are in flood, and so can lead to a lot of erosion of the riverbanks. So can cause a lot of problems that way. As you can see in the picture, it can break through like in a tarmac and damage properties as well. And the thing with this plant is that what you see on the surface is only a small piece of it. It's actually, it can go up to 3 meters deep into the ground, 7 meters wide. So it's a massive underground footprint as well. So it can be very, very hard to treat and get rid of this particular plant. If I was to give another, or just to show you kind of its spread. So I said, this picture here on the left is from, our map is from 1980, records of Japanese knotweed, and on the right is in 2016. So you can see just kind of the extent of how much it's spread just over that short period of time. And so it spreads and again causes a lot of problems for infrastructure, but also outcompetes native wildlife. And very little wildlife associated with where you have large stands of Japanese knotweed. You're not going to have birds nesting there, or plants growing up underneath it because it blankets out light. If I was to give another example, the zebra mussel. And this again first introduced to Ireland, or first discovered in Lough Derg in 1997, and believed to kind of have come in a little bit earlier than this, around 1994, possibly on something like an old second-hand boat being imported to Ireland, would have been attached to, say, the hull, and would have come in, and that's how it established. And it arrived in Lough Neagh just in 2005. And this species, again, I believe, is native to Caspian Sea. Originally, they're about 3 to 4 centimeters in size, so maybe the size of your small fingernail, your baby fingernail. And one female, when she matures, can produce 1 million eggs. And what they'll do is they'll attach onto surfaces. So wherever they land, they'll just attach on. And so any flat surface will do. That could be the side of a pier, your boat, pipes. So they've been known to cause damage to pipes because they clog up pipes. And they'll also biofoul, and this is called biofouling when they'll attach onto these surfaces. But they'll also attach onto our own native freshwater pearl mussels. Freshwater mussels, so they'll attach on and they'll just choke them out, so they'll outcompete them, so cause a lot of problems. Another issue too with these is that as they filter water, so they actually filter and purify water, and they have actually been there are some kind of research saying attributing some of the issues in Lough Neagh to these zebra mussels, because as they're filtering the water, they're making it very clear, which means that sunlight can actually penetrate a lot deeper into the water. And when you combine this then with the nutrients going into Lough Neagh, it's creating the perfect storm for things like blue-green algae to grow out of control. So they're going to have a contributing factor to that challenge there. I suppose how do you stop the spread of these? So there's you'll often see these signs around the place, but there's a quick kind of system we often use when trying to stop the spread of invasive species, and that is check, clean, dry. Just remembering those three things can make a huge difference. Check, clean, dry. So check what you're wearing. If you're out and about, if you're wearing woolly hats, gloves, if you've ever been out and about, you're going through undergrowth, or even your dog might be going through undergrowth, and you'll see the sticky backs are cleavers, the seeds of cleaver attach onto their ears or often onto your gloves or hat, and that's how plants will often spread. They'll try to move to a new area by attaching their seeds onto you. But also checking things like the lugs or the treads on your boots, earth or dirt's getting stuck in there. That's a way these things can spread. So checking your equipment after you finish kind of an evening out and about. The next step, if you do come across anything, is to clean. So a stiff brush, just brush off whatever you have on you, and make sure you're not bringing anything with you. And dry is the most important step, especially if you are kind of working with water. That could be fishing, kayaking, and many of the things that are spreading in water, they require damp conditions to survive, and they can survive sometimes days, if not longer, on damp equipment. Like, for example, a pair of waders. You say you're out fishing, and you throw, after you finish your session, you throw your waders into the boot of your car and don't think any more about it. And you come back a few days later, they can still be attached on. And so, if you were to go to a new river, you could introduce whatever that pathogen is to the new river. So drying is really, really important. So dry them out for 42 hours. Sometimes people will disinfect as well if you can't dry. But they're the key steps. Check, clean, dry, and that's how you can stop the spread of these invasive species. I'll just look at, I suppose, how can you help? So what can you actually do to help with this? A couple of quick points I'll put here for you. One step is just to become familiar with the most invasive species that are out there. And I'll put it, there's a link there at the bottom of the screen. I'll put it into the chat for you to look at. But this is, just become familiar with what are the most invasive species so that you're aware, and so you'll spot them early if they do arrive on your premises. The second point I make there is, if you are planting, always try to choose native species first. Again, firstly, supports our native wildlife and our pollinators, but also they're kind of more genetically suited to the climate we have here in Ireland. And as well, it prevents, if you're choosing native, you never have to worry about these invasive species that way. And if you do suspect that you've found one, an invasive species, you can always report it, again, on that website. Just report your sightings, and it can help us again control or map or monitor where these are showing up around the country. So always report it if you do think you've seen one. Again, spread awareness about check, clean, dry. Really important. If you're in the kind of the kayaking industry, I know from experience, like you could often go, if the weather is right, you could go out and do three different rivers on a day. And if you picked something up in the first river, you could accidentally introduce it to 2 other rivers just from that one day out. So check, clean, dry is a really important, a key way to kind of stem this or stop the spread of some of these things. And as I said, I put a link there at the bottom if anyone wants to learn a bit more about invasive species. Just a bit, we'll have a look at water quality now for a while for tourism sites. So I suppose the first thing we're saying, look, water and tourism in Northern Ireland, Pamela, or the people in the Outdoors Monitor for Northern Ireland, highlighted that 900 million was spent during visits to the outdoors in 2020 and 2021. And naturally, water is a huge part of the outdoors. And if you think about it, and I know many of your industries might be affected by this, when you're thinking about outdoor kind of tourism and kind of outdoor recreation, you're looking at things like kayaking and going swimming or surfing, even going for walks along rivers, and boat tours. Maybe it's fishing, or I know kind of a new up and coming one, but sup boards. I've seen even yoga classes been done on these stand-up paddle boards and things like that. So it is a huge, water is a huge part of tourism in Northern Ireland, and it's very important that we look after that resource that we have. It's not just for tourism or recreation as well, water. It also is where you can see from this kind of graph here, in the green on the right, or this pie chart, the green on the right hand side is rivers and lakes. So about 57.3% of water, the water that you drink or the water we access, comes from rivers and lakes, with the remaining kind of 42.6 coming from impound reservoirs and a little bit from boreholes. So that's kind of 39 different sources of water up in Northern Ireland, or in Northern Ireland. So it's also really important that we protect that resource, because it's where we get our water from, as I say, for drinking or other uses like that. How do you determine water quality? So when you're trying to figure out, when I talk about water quality, what does it mean? So in Northern Ireland, we work under the Water Framework Directive, and this was transposed into Northern Irish regulation back in 2017. And so this is again coming from EU, this legislation, and it has, again, it was transposed into Irish regulation, or Northern Ireland's regulation back in 2017. And what it establishes this new integrated approach to protection of the water environment. And how it works is there's kind of a five classification system. You can see here on the right hand side of the screen. So at the highest end, you've got high status, and then you've got good, moderate, poor, and bad at the bottom. You'll hopefully be avoiding that area there. But what the goal is with this directive is that we attain that all of our water bodies reach at least good status by the year 2027. So these two here at the top. And this is implemented through what are called river basin management plans. So these are going to run in 6-year cycles, these river basin management plans. And we're now moving into that last plan, which will bring us up to 2027. And so in Northern Ireland, there are 3 river basins. You can see them kind of laid out in the map on the left-hand side there. So the Northwestern, the Navan, and the Northeastern. And in these 3 basins, we've got 571 water bodies. This includes rivers, streams, lakes, coastal and groundwater bodies. So a massive resource there that needs to be managed, and try to improve all that to at least good by 2027, as the target suggests. So where are we kind of at with all of this? So a report released back in 2021 looking at water quality in Northern Ireland. And so if you look at rivers, you can see 2018 there was 141 rivers were achieving that good or high status, and by 2021 it was 140, so still around 30% achieving that same status. If we look at lakes, so there's 21 lakes in Northern Ireland. 5 of those back in 2018 were reaching that high or good status, and by 2021 only 3 were achieving that good ecological status. So we did see a reduction down in just over that 3-year period. And if we were to look then at our coastal and transitional water bodies, so that's transitional are like estuaries, you can see there were 10 transitional and coastal water bodies achieving good overall status back in 2018, and that's been maintained in 2021. So you can see not much has changed over that period of time, if not gotten a little bit worse. And you might be kind of wondering, like, why is this happening? Why are things, what's kind of stopping this change? So in 2022, there was 600, I think it was just over 1,500 incidents reported to Northern Ireland Environmental Agency. Of those, there was. So these would have been either reported by people or else discovered during inspection, and of those incidents, 676 were validated pollution or water pollution incidences, and that ended up being reported. And you can see that they came from a number of different sources, farming being one of them, so it's 29% from farming. Again, 75% land use, so naturally it would be a pressure. But there are other ones too, like domestic, so that'll be households. You look at industry was 18%, and Northern Irish Water as well, making up 14% of those incidences, affecting water quality in Northern Ireland. I'm just going to throw up just one or two news headlines that I just came across, just in my research for this. You can see 3 of these here in the level between August 2022 and November 2023. And 3 of these news articles are about what are called fish kills. So an incident that had happened, some pollution could be diffuse or it could be coming from, say, storage outflows, resulting something gone into these rivers that triggered a fish kill incident. So 3 of these, first one in Down, the second one in Armagh, I believe the third one was in Derry, killing 2,000 fish. So these events don't have to happen all that often to be seriously catastrophic for a river. Oftentimes you could see entire generations of fish being lost as a result of just one of these events, and it can take years for a river to bounce back from events like this. And these are kind of some of the pressures you face. Also, if you think about it, it doesn't not the best for tourism. To the last thing you want is for people to be seeing thousands of fish dead on the bank of a river. So these incidents is a concern that needs to be addressed or looked at a bit more seriously. One I know that was kind of brought to the fore last summer is Lough Neagh and the issues with the blue-green algae. Again, lots of things attributed to why this is happening. There's from dredging of sand, I believe, increasing kind of temperatures in the lake, but as well diffuse kind of point source pollution coming from storage, but also from things like agriculture. All of these nutrients feeding into the lake, triggering or resulting in this blue-green algae blooms, which are causing a lot of problems in the lake or in Lough Neagh as well. So what could I say too? Look, it's just some of the sources. Northern Ireland, there's about 2,398 operational sewage outflows, but data on these are fairly sparse. There's not that much data out there, and there are maps to show where they are, but that's kind of the extent for a lot of these outflows. A lot of this is attributed to lack of investment and budget, but again, there's not budget for monitoring a lot of these discharges. But look, if you can't measure it, it's very hard to know what's going on with this. So there is a lot of work happening. Northern Ireland Water, they have aims by end of 2027 to have 900 monitors deployed, again aiming to increase this even more over time. But they're trying to get as much monitoring as they can out there so they can figure out where these problems are coming from. And as well, look, it currently remains unclear whether this information will be made available to the public. So again, I suppose it is important that it is made clear to people about what is going on. So I suppose just what can you do? How can you help? How can you help around these issues, or issues of water quality? A couple of quick things. I'd say, look, if in your industry you use chemicals, really important that you store them properly. That the lids are kind of sealed tightly, and that they're put away properly. They're not kind of left out sitting about the place. Spills and can run off into rivers, cause serious problems, or even into drains. And make sure they're in their original containers as well, so you can always dose properly too, and if they're going out of date. And if you happen to be disposing of hazardous materials, and this could be again chemicals, but it could be paints, bleaches, things like this, you make sure you dispose of them properly and talk to your local council to see what's the best way about it. But these things, if they're kind of quickly disposed of, the problem doesn't go away, it just kind of goes somewhere else and can cause lots of issues. If you happen to have an oil tank in your business, always make sure to check that it has a bund around it, that it is bunded, which is a bund is like a moat around the tank, that in the event that there was a flood, or not a flood, in the event that there was if the tank cracked, that the oil would be stored within here, within this bund, so to prevent it from spreading and causing lots of trouble. Even if it is bunded, make sure there's a roof over it, because I have come across in many cases, the bund is perfect, but there's no roof, and so the bund is actually full of water, and so it doesn't actually function at all. It just looks like it's there, but it's not actually. If there was a crack in the tank, the oil would just overflow. So always check these things. And if in your industry you use grease traps, make sure they're functional, make sure they're working properly. Grease going down drains. I think about places like kitchens, bars, restaurants, cafes. They're going down the drains, putting a lot of pressure on treatment systems, but often if the treatment system isn't operating properly, can get out into rivers. And I didn't put pictures because I didn't want to ruin anybody's lunch later, but there was in 2017 in Greenwich, there was a discovery of a fatberg, they call it. This is a 40-ton fatberg that they call it, of fat that had lodged in pipes. Thames Water had discovered this, about the size of a double-decker bus, that had just built up in the sewers over time from fat and oil and grease going down to the drain. So again, if you make sure you have grease traps in underneath your sinks if you're in that kind of an industry, because again, if it gets into water, it can cause a lot of problems for wildlife. Those other things, looking at reducing pesticide usage, and some of these things, a couple of drops of them in a river can cause serious problems for fish and other wildlife. And the last point I'd make there is just be mindful of what you pour down the drain. You know, you might think the problem's going away, but it's going to somewhere else. So just think about things like that, and that's not just indoors, outdoors on your premises too. We'll talk kind of through a couple of other points there, just around water and climate, and how climate could start to affect water. It's just things we need to be mindful of. So you can see that lovely picture of Earth on the left hand side, and from that picture you could be mistaken. You know, if we call it Earth, but it's planet, mostly made up of water. About 71% of the surface of Earth is actually water. But of that, about 97% is actually in the oceans. About 3% is fresh water, and of that, less than 1% is actually easily accessible to us. So it might seem like it's everywhere, but it's not all that abundant. And so that's why it's so important that we look after and protect this resource. Water moves through the environment. This picture on the left might be bringing some of you back to your days learned doing geography in school, but the water cycle. So water moves through the environment through this cycle. And so if I still quickly run through it, water evaporates from the oceans, or sometimes from the surface of the land, up into our atmosphere. As it rises in over the land, it will condense, or it will cool down and condense, and then it will fall as precipitation. So that could be rain, sleet, snow, and it'll rain on the land. And over time, that water will run off back into rivers, lakes, back to sea, and will evaporate. And this cycle will repeat over and over again. Sometimes it can take thousands of years, especially if water gets frozen up in glaciers. But this is how water moves throughout the environment, through this water cycle, that most of us never ever think about, but it is happening all the time. As temperatures increase, or as our climate shifts, what this means is that more water will evaporate. I think if it starts to get warmer, more of this water will evaporate. So also on top of that, warmer air can actually hold more water. And so this is starting to have effects on our water cycle. So think if more water is evaporating off, it's leading to droughts. Also, because it's being stored, more can be stored in the air. You could have prolonged periods where there's not as much rainfall, which can lead to things like droughts. But also, eventually all that water has to fall. And so when it does, you have much more extreme rainfall events, which can cause a lot of problems. So we're starting to see shifts or changes in that water cycle. And when you think of problems with climate and water, you often think about quantities and not as much being available. But there's also a quality issue. For example, if you look at things like droughts, you could start to see higher concentrations of pollutants. If there's not as much water in rivers, any pollutions going in are much more concentrated. Also, as waters become warmer, they can't hold as much oxygen, which affects wildlife living in the rivers, so it puts them under more stress. Same thing, if there's less water in the rivers, slower flow, which doesn't suit a lot of fish or the wildlife that live in our rivers, so it can cause problems. At the same time, floods have their own issues. So if you've got more floods, you've got a lot of things like, think about things like oil, silts, bits of rubber from tires being washed off into rivers or into drains which go to rivers, so adding pollutants to water. Also, if you've got higher flows in rivers, you've a lot more erosion, so silt and particles going into the water, which can cause issues as well to water quality. We'll just kind of, the next subject I'd like to talk to you about just for a while is water conservation. So a massive resource, our precious resource we have, that we often, as I say, take for granted. In Northern Ireland, Northern Irish water is kind of sort of connected to the public water supply. There's over 910,000 properties attached to this supply. They provide about 608 million litres of drinking water every single day during 2022. And all of this is distributed across the country through this big network of means supplying the water out, but also stores taking the water or the wastewater away afterwards. So it's a massive resource that's been managed. And they're the sole provider of water in Northern Ireland. If you're to look at your footprint, so how much water you use, so as I say, it's a massive resource that we often take for granted. In Northern Ireland, people use on average 145 litres of water every day. And you might think, there's no way I use that much water. Try just drink my 2 litres and I'm happy enough. But if you think about all the other times you use water, you'd be surprised how quick it adds up. And you'll see as I flick through here, things like when you're cooking food, maybe you wash the dog, you're mopping the floor, washing machines, washing fruit, toilets, washing cars, and you'll see as it's clicking through things like brushing your teeth, washing your hands, showers, all of these things add up over time. And so you don't think about water that way, but 145 litres of water every day. If anyone's interested in looking at this in a little bit more detail, maybe you want to compete with people in work, there is a really cool calculator to have online there. I'll share the link with you, just so you can calculate your own water footprint, and I'll throw it up there for you. There was a paper released back in 2020 looking at kind of global footprint. So there's the water you see all that up front, but there's also this kind of the hidden water footprint. And I showed from that paper, there were a couple of examples of the amount of the footprint of different products. Things like, look, some of you might be drinking your cup of coffee this morning. When you look at it, you'd never think that there's 140 litres of water went into actually producing that one cup of coffee. Hopefully none of you are having a pint of beer at the moment, but if you are, about 76 litres of water went into producing that. Some of you might be watching this on a laptop. Those 190 litres of water went into producing the components that make that laptop. If you're drinking water, that 1 litre plastic bottle of water takes 7 litres of water to produce it. So these are the kind of hidden parts of the water footprint we often don't think about. So I know right now I'm looking out the window behind, or kind of in front of me here. It's raining. So we get a lot of rain in Ireland, but so why is it so important that we conserve water? And it's worth looking at things like your carbon footprint. So for every cubic metre of water consumed, we generate about 10.5 kgs of carbon emissions. And just to kind of give an example, just one leaky toilet wastes about 4.5 million litres and generates about 46 tonnes of carbon emissions every single year. And that's about the equivalent of a typical passenger car, just from a leaking toilet. So there is a massive kind of footprint that comes with this as well that's worth considering. So look, simple ways, we look at kind of some simple practical ways you can look at reducing your water consumption. Number one source, looking at leaks, and I'll get into that in a little bit in a minute. But other kind of examples of ways water's wasted. Things like only half filling a washing machine or dishwasher. Wasting food, as I said, the kind of footprint that goes with that food. When you get up in the morning, if you're brushing your teeth, leaving your tap running, if you're preparing vegetables, leaving tap running while you're doing these things, massive wastages of water. So look, simple ways to save water. You could look at, in hotels, rather providing bottles of water and giving a jug of water they can use, and they can call the desk if they want to get a new jug of water brought up. Because look, oftentimes people might have a sip or two of a plastic bottle of water, and then the rest of that goes to waste. They don't use the rest of it, as well as the kind of the plastic pollution, and also the water went into producing that plastic. And if you look at things like showers or baths, showers use a lot less water than baths, so encouraging people to use showers over baths. Also shorter showers, like a long shower already has the same impact as a bath as well. So trying to keep the showering time to a minimum. Reusing water if you can. And that could be, if you're washing vegetables, using a bowl to wash the vegetables rather than just washing it down the sink. And you could look at plants. If you're watering plants, doing something called bottoms up watering. So that's dipping the plant into the pot of water so it soaks up into the soil. And again, it means you're not losing a lot of the water. Two other points there: turning off taps when you're doing things, and machines on full loads when you're doing them. If you're out and about on the premises, look at things like avoiding using hoses. So if you have to, you can use hoses with triggers on them, so it's more kind of pointed to uses when you are using it. But also looking at things like using a bucket or a watering can, just to reduce the amount of water you're using. And for plants, you could look at things like soil protection, so mulches, which protect the soils and keep them moist, so you don't need to water as often. Look at rainwater harvesting, another really interesting issue I see a lot of people getting involved with, and really it's just capturing rainwater from the surface of your building. You can have big elaborate systems that go underground, or something as simple as you can see in the picture here, which is just a rainwater harvesting butt that you could use again for watering plants or cleaning down surfaces. Again, reduces your water footprint. Another quick one worth looking at: grey water. Grey water, all this is so if you think about water that you're using, do you need drinking water to flush a toilet? Probably not, but some of you might be surprised if the water in your toilet is the exact same as the water that you pour out of the tap to drink water. It's the same quality. And so grey water is, again, so water that comes from places like sinks, washing machines, baths. And again, all it is you take this water, give it a quick clean, so through a filter system, and then this can be reused for things like again, watering plants or for cleaning down surfaces. So it's filtered, and again, you can see it is good enough for these uses, but can reduce your water usage massively. Grey water accounts for about 80%, up to 80% of your household water. So that's kind of a system. So in some places, people are getting systems like this put in place. Other innovations, just to quickly look at, things like dual flush toilets. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these. Waterless urinals, shower flow regulators to reduce the flow of water coming out, or in taps putting aerators to reduce the amount of water coming out of the taps, having the same pressure but not as much water coming out, so reducing your footprint there. I suppose, look, no talk about no conversation about water conservation would be complete without leaks. Talking about leaks, there's currently about 158 million litres of treated water in Northern Ireland lost every day through leaks. Often this is because of old pipes. The systems are very, very old, and they're hard to get to. Being underground, you have to dig up roads to get to them. And we also use a lot more water today than we used to. So leaks obviously a massive challenge, causing issues for water conservation, or just loss of water. Things to look at. So you can check at home, but on your business, just look at looking for constant drips, or check outdoor taps as well. But a leaking tap can lose 1,500 litres of water every single year. If you have appliances like washing machines, just check the pipes and valves that they're not dripping. Looking at things like this, and these are all places you can lose water from. If you want to just do kind of a test to see if you have leaks on your premises, you can do this quick check. And what you do is you make sure all your appliances are off. So maybe this would be something you do on a Sunday evening, when things are a bit quieter, say if you're at a hotel, but turn off your appliances. And so make sure all appliances are off, and you turn off your inside stop valve. Have a look at your water meter and just record what's written on it. And in 1 hour, when you come back, take another reading. And if you see that the number has changed, it means that there is a leak somewhere in your system. So you might need to get in contact with either a plumber or Irish Northern Ireland Water just to get this sorted. So that's a quick way you can check for this. And look, why would you want to monitor your water usage? As I said earlier, look, that which gets measured gets managed. So if you're recording it, you can accurately report on your successes in water conservation. It's also required if you're looking to get independent certification. You need to know your numbers around consumption and what are you doing to conserve it. And the same goes for things like green awards. You have to be able to prove that you have seen improvements. And the last point there is sharing data with staff. So like if you're trying to change behavior, it's nice to be able to show that the efforts being made by your employees, they can actually see the changes. So it kind of makes it more meaningful and transparent, and it kind of encourages people to keep up the good work. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about this, there is this really useful toolkit that has been put together by Tourism Northern Ireland. I'll put a link in the chat for you. Again, provides lots of templates and kind of guides on how you can if you want to learn a little bit more about water conservation, just things to look at. So I'll share that with you there. And the last kind of section, just to mention very, very briefly, was just sustainable drainage systems. They're getting a lot of traction going, very interesting systems. Again, great for biodiversity too. What is a SUD? So it's not the stuff you'd see in a bubble bath. It's SUDs. These are systems designed to try and mimic natural drainage, and you can see kind of in that picture there. And so, why is this interesting? So, or kind of useful? So I look outside my window behind this screen here, behind my screen, and it's raining at the moment. But have you ever wondered where that water actually goes to? Rain's landing on the surface. I'm looking out at the road and I can see it landing there. But where does it actually go? And so in nature, you can see kind of in the left-hand side of the picture, that water would either go through the soil, down to the groundwater, and go back slowly but surely to the sea or rivers, or it would run off the rivers. Some of it would be taken up by plants and some of it would evaporate off. That's naturally what would happen. But on the road I can see outside me, this tarmac road, that water can't go through. And so all it can do is run off to the closest drain. And so what this does, these drains go straight to rivers, and so it increases the flow of water going to rivers. It can cause a lot of problems. And so you can see the contrast. And what a SUD does, or a sustainable drainage system, tries to mimic that picture on the left. And lots of the different examples of these. For example, I was in Kildare not that long ago at the council offices, and they had a car park like the picture you can see in the top left there. The car park had this surface with spaces between them, kind of felt like cobblestone underfoot. And so water could filter through this into a gravel pit below, and it was slowly released back to the river, or slowly back to the drains. And as the water passed through, it filtered out things like cigarette butts, oil, grease, things like this. So it helps clean the water, but also filters out or slows it down getting it to the river. So it can help with flooding. And lots of examples of these, as I say, could be just in this picture on the top right, there's a river kind of behind this long vegetation. So it's just creating friction, slowing that water running off down and filtering it as it's going along. Things like green roofs, rainwater harvesting is another example, or things like swales and wetlands, are examples of SUDs. And again, what they do, as I mentioned, they reduce water pollution because they capture a lot of that silt sediment that would be running off. They can help reduce flooding. They can actually, because they slowly release water back, can help prevent droughts because it's slowly releasing the water back. And as well, they often, in many cases, provide habitats for wildlife and amenities for ourselves too. They're nice places to be, and so kind of they have an aesthetic value as well. So they're gaining a lot of traction and well worth looking into. So just want to thank you all for that session, or for coming along to the session. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you got a few things from it. And if you have any questions, I can let you know. So thank you very much.